University of Cumberland student Adam Sulfridge has been in the news lately because of a piece that he had written in the Times Tribune that shed light on corruption in the Whitley County judicial system.
Well, I was working as a reporter for the Times Tribune, a daily paper out of Corbin, Kentucky, with a circulation of around 6,000. And my former manager, Samantha Swindler, she had heard rumors that you could buy guns out of the sheriff's barbershop. The local sheriff, Whitley County Sheriff Lawrence Hodge, was actually a barber at the time, and she stuck an intern on the case. They fought with the sheriff for a while over some open records request, hoping to inspect his evidence log. Based on his reaction, Samantha kind of determined that things couldn't be right, and there had to be at least some truth to the allegations that the sheriff was corrupt. She went through several reporters, and then I was hired in June of 2009, shortly after audits came out from Kentucky Auditor Crit Llewellyn, claiming the sheriff at that time had a deficit in his official accounts of $125,000. We started looking into the audits, and from there it spiraled into a massive investigation of theft of drugs, theft of guns, abuse of public trust, theft of public money, extortion. I mean, pretty much anything you could think of, it's led that way.
Whitley County is referred to by many as a poverty-driven area that has a very large drug problem. What is the truth behind that?
Well, the approximate population of Whitley County is 38,000, and a Kentucky report indicated that it's one of 5 Kentucky counties where, on average, there are 4 prescriptions for controlled substances per resident of Whitley County. The rate of drug abuse is increasing faster in Central Appalachia compared to the national average, and drug abuse itself is more prevalent in Central Appalachia than compared to the national average. And what we found during the course of our investigation was that many drug dealers who were peddling these pills onto our streets were being arrested by the sheriff. And for a long time he was actually receiving praise for his ability to arrest these drug traffickers and the meth manufacturers. But what we found was that the cases were getting dismissed, and major cases where people had up to 100 OxyContin pills in their trunk and $35,000 in cash in their trunk, they weren't getting presented to the Whitley County grand jury. They were being pled down to misdemeanors, and the persons were receiving no jail time at all.
In December 2009 and January 2010, you wrote a few articles regarding the fact that in all of 2009, there were no single felony drug-related cases that were presented to grand juries. What happened there?
In 2009, there were over 1,000 felony cases in Whitley County, and during that time, we went through all of the files in the circuit court clerk's office, and every one that was related to the sheriff's department and that was drug-related, we pulled it out separately. And then I went through with my former manager, Samantha Swindler, and we looked at the outcome of all those cases. Every one of them was either just flat out dismissed, or they were amended to misdemeanors, meaning that they most often never served a day in jail afterwards. One such case was Michael Hardesty. He was arrested for manufacturing methamphetamine near a primary school in Corbin, Kentucky. Several months later, the case was never presented to the grand jury despite it being a felony charge. We asked the sheriff about it. He reassured us that he was going to present the case to the grand jury. Time went on, and as of today, 2 years later, that man has never been indicted on manufacturing methamphetamine.
What in the Hardesty case was notable, and what stood out to you?
At the time that the Hardesty arrest happened, the sheriff had been avoiding the Times Tribune. However, he was still giving interviews to the competing paper. And had it not been for him posing for that paper outside of the home where the Hardesty meth lab was found, we may not have ever actually known about it. And what's very interesting about that case is that after we publicized the fact that the man had not been indicted, residents of Corbin started contacting the local court system, the Commonwealth attorney, and they were demanding actually that something happened in this case. And the Commonwealth attorney sent a letter to the sheriff's department instructing them to present the case to the grand jury. They failed to do so, and Basically, we got a good community following behind us, and they demanded that something happen, and the Commonwealth Attorney eventually said that the reporting of the Times-Tribune weighed very heavily on his decision to request a special grand jury to investigate the sheriff on state charges.
What can you tell me about the theft of the public's money?
There are many ways that the public's money went missing under Sheriff Hodges' administration. One way, most notably, was in his drug and alcohol fund. This was money that he was allegedly using to pay informants to make undercover drug buys, presumably to go arrest those drug traffickers. But what we noticed was that the Sheriff's Department did not present any cases to the grand jury. They did not arrest people stemming from undercover drug buys. And this was a substantial amount of money, upwards of, $17,000. An affidavit was released just a couple weeks ago from ATF Special Agent Todd Tremaine. In the affidavit by ATF Special Agent Todd Tremaine, it indicated that there were periods of time when Hodge would cash the majority of checks written to himself for the purpose of undercover buys. Those were around the time of his wife's birthday for several years, before Labor Day, before Memorial Day, before Christmas, and then occasionally just before random weekends. That got the attention of federal investigators. Also, there was one case in particular that the Times-Tribune looked into. It was the arrest of Richard Van Benson out of Corbin. He possessed 17 firearms despite being a convicted felon. When we asked about those guns, the sheriff implied that the ATF took them. Actually, he outright stated ATF took the guns. And I called somebody who was higher up in the ATF. They confirmed the ATF never seized those guns. Later on, I found out or received information indicating that the sheriff had sold some of those guns to locals, including a local attorney. When we filed an open records request for the whereabouts of those guns, we first didn't receive any response, and then the very next Monday, we heard reports that the sheriff's office had been broken into. The sheriff told Kentucky State Police and alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agents that 78 guns went missing from his office, and conveniently all of the guns we had asked about were in the list of missing firearms. The affidavit released just 2 weeks ago did indicate that some of those guns had been retrieved from locals, including the attorney. It also indicated the sheriff was also indicted in November of 2010 for abuse of public trust and tampering with physical evidence. The tampering with physical evidence charge stemmed from the fact that he had taken the firearms and converted them to his personal gain by selling them and pocketing the money.
You worked on this case with Samantha Swindler, who recently had an article published with the Harvard Neiman Reports talking about small town reporting. From what I've been told and what I've learned talking with you, you've had some even death threats sent towards you. Is this true?
That's correct. There was a certain level of danger involved in this investigation. Immediately after the break-in allegedly occurred at the Sheriff's Department, on the steps of the courthouse in downtown Williamsburg, the sheriff threw some profanity at me in front of everybody, didn't care to. Sometime after that, I was alerted by law enforcement that there had been credible threats made against my life. You know, it's one of those things that you just kind of roll with. We really weren't too concerned until multiple people in the law enforcement community were telling us, you need to be careful, don't go out in the county, try to stay in places where you have cell phone service, and make sure you got a gun on you, And so it's actually interesting, but Samantha and I went out and purchased pistols. We enrolled in a concealed deadly weapon permit course together, and after that time we did go everywhere armed, and probably for good reason. One time while I was outside of my home, I was approached by a man who was later indicted on federal charges related to the sheriff. I actually had to draw my pistol in that situation, but nothing too bad happened, and I'm thankful for it, and Samantha was okay as well. Despite the threats, though, this is something that you can't back off of. You have a moral obligation to do this. The public has entrusted you. Everybody who gave us information, they put a lot of trust into us, and we just couldn't let them down. And Samantha, wouldn't let me back off of it. I wouldn't let her back off it. We reinforced each other and went through it. If you think about it, this is a county that, or this is a region that is known for poverty and drug abuse. And here you have an elected official getting paid $80,000 a year from taxpayers, yet he decides he needs more money and is allegedly taking money from drug dealers in exchange for having their cases dismissed. And it's a place known for drugs, yet there are drug dealers being arrested, and the public's cheering this on, unknowing that those drugs are going right back out onto the street, and that the drug dealers are going right back out onto the street. And here are firearms being taken in from the sheriff's department, and they're unlawfully being distributed on the street. Nobody knows where those drugs ended up, or where those some of those firearms have ended up. And the public money, you can't turn a blind eye to that. The people of this area deserve better, and I believe that we did our job.
Many will say that in local governments and in governments in general, there's a lot of corruption that hits within the officials and those who work, quote unquote, for the people. Why did you decide to focus in on this particular incident, if you will, this particular person? And if you had it all to do again, would you still do it?
There's no doubt that we would have still done this, especially knowing what we do know now. Like I said, this all started with a hunch from Samantha Swindler, who is very perceptive the entire time, very, very perceptive, picked up on a lot of things. And, you know, I don't think either one of us would change a thing other than maybe we would have dug just a little bit harder, because, you know, there were certain things that did come out that we had a good indication that things were wrong. Such as the extortion. We never got around to printing a story on it, just simply because there wasn't enough to run with yet. And luckily, federal law enforcement picked up on those tips as well, and they have got enough on him to probably convict him of extortion. I do wish that we could have dug a little deeper and got a little bit more, but you know, it's a paper with a managing editor who is also working as a reporter, and then there's only 2 other reporters. I'm very proud of the work we did and the amount of time that we did it. As far as why Hodge, why not Hodge? All the evidence was kind of there. I mean, we had an audit from the state indicating money was missing. We started having a few people give tips, such as, you know, he was selling firearms. All the paperwork was there in the clerk's office to indicate that nobody was ever indicted in all of 2009. We didn't have to go through him to prove that he never sent drugs to the crime lab. And fortunately for us, he permitted us to interview him. And then that interview on November 30, 2009, which lasted for about an hour and a half, he sealed his own fate on a lot of things by claiming ATF had taken the guns, by saying he just couldn't talk about things, he didn't know about this case and that case, and if anybody has regrets, I'd say it's probably him.